If there's one member of the Beatles who had serious, long-standing issues with Yoko Ono, John Lennon's famously polarizing partner, it was Paul McCartney. From the time Yoko started showing up in the studio, Paul was said to have been angry at it was clear that she was causing tension by being there, that she even called it interference with work. The creative chemistry was thrown off. Most people forgot about Paul's old band drama, but he never fully let it go. What really happened between them, and why hasn't it been brought up in all these years, that even though he's 82 years old, Paul McCartney is finally breaking up with her? Silence. He tells the world why he never forgiven Yoko Ono in a confession that is both honest and raw. And the truth could change everything you thought you knew about Paul's painful breakup with the Beatles' life as a child for McCartney. James Paul McCartney was born on June 18, 1942, at Walton Hospital in Liverpool, was where his mother, Mary Patricia Mohan, had trained and worked as a nurse. His dad, Jim McCartney, was also Irish and had planned his whole life around being tough. Paul had a younger brother named Michael and later a stepsister. He loved telling stories about places like music halls and cotton warehouses. Ruth was born when his dad married Angie for the second time. Mary, on the other hand, was a devout Catholic and had Paul and Michael baptized in this way. Jim, who was once a Protestant and is now an agnostic, religion was more in the background in the McCartney home. They weren't big on church, but they were big on love and music. Plenty of before the bombs went off, Jim had a good job as a cotton salesman. Rising began as a sample boy at a Han Chinese company. When the war broke out, when things got tough, Han's shut down, and Jim got a job as a lathe turner at Napier's, a defense plant, where he worked night shifts. As a fireman. By 1944, the family had moved into a flat in Nosley, and a few years later, Mary moved into a council house in Speke. Her job as a midwife became her main source of income after the war. Little Paul started his own business while Jim's cotton job was being downgraded. Went to Stockton Wood Road Primary School in Speke, but then moved on to Joseph Williams Junior School because Stockton was too crowded. He was as smart as a whip and passed the 11+ in 1953. He was one of only 3 out of 90 people to get into the prestigious Liverpool Institute. In 1954, he met a younger boy named George at grammar school. Harrison on the bus and hit it off. Paul later said he did talk to Harrison sometimes. Down to George. He was only a year younger than her. That bus ride made them bond for life. Thanks to Mary's steady with the extra money, the family moved up to a nicer house on 24th Road in Allerton. Mary was always on the go, riding her bike through the cold streets of Liverpool to help give birth. Paul remembered her. As he thought back to leaving at 3 a.m., the snow on the road stuck in his mind like frost. But everything changed on October 31, 1956. Mary died of an embolism when Paul was only 14 years old. He had surgery for breast cancer and then lost her. Her death left a scar on him that would become a point of deep connection years later. 2 years later, John Lennon also lost his mother Julia in a terrible accident. Jim McCartney wasn't just he worked hard and liked jazz. In the 1920s, he led Jim Max's jazz band. He played music and an upright piano in the family home and pushed Paul to take piano lessons, but the boy refused. He liked learning by ear. When he was 11, he tried out for the Liverpool Cathedral Choir but didn't make it. Instead, he settled into the choir at St. Barnabas Church in Mossley Hill. Gave him a shiny nickel-plated trumpet for his 14th birthday. That changed when rock and roll took over the radio, especially on Radio Luxembourg. Paul wanted to sing and play. He traded the trumpet for a famous Zenith acoustic guitar that weighed 15 pounds. Playing the guitar with his right hand felt weird. His mind was made up when he saw a poster of Slim Whitman playing left-handed. Paul flipped the strings and made that guitar. He wrote his first song, I Lost My Little Girl, at that peak. he wrote an early version of "When I'm 64" on the family piano while he was enjoying American rhythm and blues, but Little Richard stole his heart. He was his hero and his fire. This was the first song Paul ever wrote. Tall Sally sang in public for the first time at a Butlins FY holiday camp talent show, where she sang in front of strangers. The quiet boy from Speak had found his voice in an instant. The history of the Beatles at 15. On a sunny afternoon, Paul McCartney had an accident in St. Peter's Church Hall on July 6, 1957. Walton and walked right into destiny. John Lennon was on stage with his skiff band, the Quarrymen, singing. McCartney was interested in the rough mix of rock and roll and bluesy folk rhythms. When they asked him to become a rhythm guitarist, it wasn't just a new member they got, it was the launch of one of the most famous music partnerships. By 1958, George Harrison had joined the band. A quiet but skilled guitarist a year younger than Paul did. At first, Paul admitted to talking down to George, but their bond would not be broken. Next came Stuart Sutcliffe, John Lennon's art school friend who agreed to be a member of the band. By 1960, they had gone by names like Johnny and the Moondogs, the Beatles, but it wasn't until August that they chose the name that would make the world go crazy, the Beatles. Before going to Hamburg for a rough 5-show residency, they hired drummer Pete Best. Hamburg was rough, but it made them stronger. The gigs were intense all night long. Their music skills improved quickly. In 1961, Sutcliffe left the group and McCartney picked up the bass either reluctantly or with a quiet desire to do so. In the same year that the Beatles went on tour, the Beat Brothers made their first professional recording. Liverpool was interested in the song My Bonnie, which was sung by Tony Sheridan. Brian Epstein owned a record store and was hired as their manager. In January 1962, giving the band their first dose of structure and polish. In August, Pete Best left and Ringo Starr came in. In October, Love Me Do became a hit. By 1963, the Beatles were big stars in the UK. By 1964, they were big stars in the US. It was unique and had never been seen before. Fans screamed and sold out shows. And the term Beatlemania was created. Paul, with his boyish good looks and wide eyes, known as the cute Beatle, he was more than just a pretty face. He and Lennon became a powerful writing team early on. I saw her standing there. She loves you. I want to hold your hand, and Can't Buy Me Love. Their chemistry was electric, and their styles went well together. McCartney's melodic touch to Lennon's edge. In August 1965, McCartney Yesterday, a haunting ballad with just his voice and a string quartet, broke the mold. It was the first Beatles song. Classical music and was the first song recorded by a single member. Yesterday was one of the most covered songs in music history, leaving McCartney known for more than just making hits. But as a serious composer, by the time the band began working on Rubber Soul later that year, McCartney had already had an impact. Musicologist Ian MacDonald says Paul was no longer just a rising star. Songwriter, he was becoming the band's director of music, producer. An unofficial musical Rubber Soul was praised by critics as a big step forward in sound and sophistication. McCartney remembered, Our cute phase was over, and it was time to grow, but the sessions showed that there were problems. It was clear, there was growing tension between Lennon, McCartney, and Paul. Critical of George's playing. In 1966, Revolver took their growth even further. McCartney led the way with music that was sonically bold, lyrically complex, and defied genres. Charged with Paperback Writer, the band's first song that wasn't about love or romance, the ads for it and some of the first music videos were made for the song's B-side. Harrison later called them the forerunners of videos, but Ella Lehner Ribby really shocked everyone. It was just Paul's voice and a string octet that George Martin put together. The song was a big change from the traditional sad and modern music. Critic Jonathan Gould said it was a rare tour divorce by 1967 live performance was behind them, but McCartney wouldn't let the band go. He pushed for a new idea, the Beatles as a made-up band. The different personalities behind the band Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club let them try a lot of different things. As Paul said, "We were sick of being the Beatles. We weren't boys anymore, we were men. We thought of ourselves as artists." The album shocked the world and is often called rock's first concept album. Paul was its main architect. Then tragedy struck Brian Epstein, who was their manager, and it was a sudden death in August 1967 for Steady Hand. Without anyone to steer the ship, McCartney took over as leader, but it wasn't easy. The made-for-TV movie was his first big idea as de facto boss. It was a crazy shoot for Magical Mystery Tour, which Paul mostly directed himself. It was the Beatles' first real mistake, and things only got worse in 1968. During the recording of the White Album, the band was breaking up. Personalities clashed, patience got tired, and McCartney's need to be perfect started to drive the others away. During the early 1969 Let It Be sessions, the tension was McCartney was caught on camera giving the band a lecture on discipline and direction while lamenting the loss of Epstein's leadership. In the midst of the chaos, McCartney found comfort in love. He married a photographer, Linda Eastman, in March 1969, and their first child was born in August of that year. Mary, named after Paul's late mother, around the same time that the Beatles were making their last album. Abbey Road producer George Martin suggested a continuous suite of songs. Paul liked the idea, but John Lennon didn't. Compromise between a standard side 1 and McCartney's planned medley on side 2. Then the world spread a crazy rumor Paul died in a car accident in 1966, and a lookalike took his place. Obviously nonsense, but it turned into a full-on plot to shut it down. The November cover of Life magazine showed McCartney, Linda, and their family, with the bold words, "Paul is still with us." Behind the scenes, though, the band was breaking up. In September 1969, Lennon told them he was leaving but agreed to keep quiet while business deals were worked out. McCartney was already at odds with the others over new manager Alan Klein. Made it public in April 1970 was a shock to the world, but the band knew it had to end. On December 31, 1970, McCartney filed a lawsuit to officially dissolve the Beatles. A court-appointed receiver started to sort out Apple Corps' finances. March 1971, the Beatles' partnership ended for good on January 9, 1975. There would be lawsuits and squabbles for years, though, like the breakup of a band whose creative chemistry had changed in the history of music, Paul McCartney never stopped from being a 15-year-old guitar genius in Liverpool to the driving force behind the Beatles' most ambitious moments. He did it all. Wasn't just the cute Beatle, he was the thing that held everything together until he himself couldn't. When Beatlemania was at its peak, the Beatles weren't just rock stars, they were icons who lived under. Fans all over the world fell in love with the Fab Four, but Paul stole the hearts of the most people. McCartney was the poster boy because he was cute, boyish, and very talented. For pop perfection, girls screamed his name in the streets, wrote his initials on notebooks, and dreamed of becoming Mrs. McCartney one day, but while everyone else dreamed, Paul was living his own complicated love story. One that would last 60 years and include 3 marriages, a lot of inspiration, and more than a few broken hearts. People all over the world knew the Beatles, and Paul McCartney fell in love with a girl from Liverpool named Ran. Things took a serious turn when Ran got pregnant in 1960. They were engaged for a short time, but their relationship fell apart after she tragically lost the baby. By 1962, after the relationship was over, McCartney would say that he wasn't really faithful to while they were together. In the early, wild days of the Beatles in Hamburg, where temptation was everywhere, girls were a big part of the group. A big part of the scene before was the mood, and Paul was even involved. There were others as well. In the early years of the Beatles' career, they had many close friends and even closer relationships. Thelma Pickles, who had been with John Lennon before, and Iris Caldwell, who used to be with George Harrison. Before fame turned it into a tabloid story, it wasn't unusual for the guys to switch girlfriends every once in a while. Jane Asher, the it girl of swinging London, steps in as a sensation. If Ran was Paul's Jane Asher, the girl next door, was very different from other girls. She was beautiful, smart, and an important part of London's cultural elite. She met Paul when she worked for a BBC music show when she was 17 and got to go backstage at a Beatles concert. They hit it off right away. Soon, Paul moved in with the Asher family in London, living in their fancy home and having what he called a homey intellectual environment that deeply affected his creativity. They were together for 5 years during the peak of Beatlemania. Jane is a rising star as an actress who has been in movies like Alfie Deep End and The Mask of the Red Death were poised and private. She never talked about Paul in public, even when their relationship fell apart. They got engaged in 1967, but as their fame grew, things got tense. More and more, Paul's drug use made their relationship worse. The final blow came in 1968. When Jane found him cheating on her with American author Francie Schwartz. Jane broke up with him in a classy way. Schwartz later wrote about their affair in her 1972 book Body Count, which was based on a BBC talk show. Even though things went badly, Jane had a big impact on Paul's music. Songs like, And I Love Her, You Won't See Me, I See You Through You, What You Do for No One and What We Said Today came from the ups and downs of their relationship. Paul later thought about this when he was living with the Ashers, provided stability and comfort during the chaos, which is what they called it. In 1967, fate brought Paul together with Linda Eastman, who would become his great love. American photographer Linda Eastman backstage at a Georgie Fame concert. They ran into each other again in New York, and by 1968, not long. Paul broke up with Jane. Linda and Paul were dating. She was artistic, strong-willed, and grounded, and she was also beautiful. In 1969, they married. They got married in a small ceremony at London's Merillion Town Hall. Paul then adopted Heather, Linda's daughter, she had a previous marriage and had 5 children with him, including Mary, Stella and James. Linda, one of Paul's ex-girlfriends, wasn't happy to just watch. She became his creative partner and helped him learn new things, encouraging me to learn how to play the keyboards and perform with him as part of Wings. Their first and only duo album was Ram, dropped in 1971, but they didn't fully launch Wings until the 1970s. The couple hid from the public eye by living in a remote farmhouse in Scotland. They were far from the chaos of in the days when he was in the Beatles. Paul put all of his heart into songs that were influenced by Linda. Songs like Linda, Two of Us, My It's Possible That I'm amazed by how strong their bond was. Over the course of 30 years, they were apart for about a week while Paul was in jail in Japan in 1980 for having marijuana on him. When Linda died, she died of breast cancer in 1998, when she was 56 years old. Paul was heartbroken. He called her he often said he felt like she was a beautiful, strong, unusual, and amazingly talented woman. McCartney was truly blessed to have shared his life with her. He was grieving but still wanted to connect with others. Finally, he got to know Heather Mills, a former model and outspoken activist who lost her leg. Their first date was at a charity event in 1999, where they met. The next year, in 2002, they got married in Ireland in a big, fancy ceremony. Then fell in love with her again in his 60s and wrote songs about her. The press wasn't as impressed with Much Rain and See Your Sunshine, though. Years ago, McCartney Jr. Was always getting attention because of rumors about problems in her past and her. They had a daughter together named Beatrice, who has mostly stayed out of the spotlight, and had a bad relationship with fame. They were no longer together by 2006. Their divorce in 2008 was a public show. Prenup. Heather asked for almost $250 million at first, but she only got $50 million after a nasty trial. The drama was great for tabloids. Allegedly insulted his daughter Stella, threw water on Paul's lawyer, and made herself look like the one who was wronged. Paul, ever the gentleman, kept his focus on music. It's been a difficult time, he said, but music heals. If Heather was chaos, music is therapy for me. Judy Shev was calm. They met in the Hamptons in 2007 while on vacation. Nancy is the beautiful vice president of her family's transportation business and a board member. They both live close by. Of New York's MTA was private, grounded, and dramatic. In 2011, Paul and Nancy they got married at the same registry office where he married Linda more than 40 years ago. Paul, who is in his 80s and surprisingly quiet, often raves about how strong New York is and how she brings balance to his life. I try to be helpful as a husband, she said. I like to be the guy who gives strength. It was my job to be both strong and romantic. The love song, My Valentine, was written with her in from Liverpool to the Hamptons, in my mind, a quiet ode to lasting love. McCartney's love life hasn't been easy. He's been young and careless, passionate and devoted, broken and whole. Love, like music, has been a constant through it all. And while millions used to scream for the cute Paul, McCartney's most meaningful songs have been shaped not by fantasy but by the women in his life, whom he walked with through every verse of his amazing life. This brings us to Yoko Ono, the woman Paul married. McCartney just couldn't say it. How did Yoko Ono change everything the Beatles stood for in the world of the Yoko Ono, the woman who worked with the Beatles, is the most controversial figure in the band. Woman who would marry John Lennon in the end but first showed up when the band was